Hello. Um, so this has been a very chaotic few days news-wise. I'm just going to have a quick recap of some of the news before I get onto the main point of the video. The Republican National Convention is underway in Cleveland. The state roll call has just been read out, and not surprisingly, Donald Trump is now the official Republican nominee for president. I think that and this would actually correlate to the later part of my video. I'm a big critic of Trump, but I think it would be unfair to say what sort of president he will be for sure before he's actually president. Donald Trump may be a great president. At the moment, my instinct is he has played dangerous games of division, and he's a very divisive character. But that's my opinion. Um, Anyway, that's it. That's official. He chose Mike Pence as his running mate. I think that was a rather boring choice, from what I understand. Mike Pence is, he ticks all the boxes. He's a true conservative and all the rest of it. But he's a bit of a boring figure from my point of view. He's not particularly exciting. He doesn't really stand out. That's just from my outside point of view. I might be completely wrong. The good people of Indiana may disagree with me, but there you go. I was expecting them to choose Christie actually, but there you go. There's this train attack in Germany last night in the city of Würzburg. Um, yeah, I mean it's horrendous, but we're almost becoming desensitized to these Islamist attacks now, and it was an Islamist attack. I mean, the guy shouted out Allahu Akbar. 17 years old, an Afghan refugee. Thankfully, in this case, no one died, but that you know those three people seriously injured are going to have presumably life changing injuries. The next day, people were rallying in support of refugees. I want to be careful how I say this, but sometimes find it a little bit hard to understand Germany. I mean, I don't know whether it's war guilt or I'm go getting hot water for saying that, but I don't know what it is. But in most other countries, you wouldn't get that sort of environment now. Either that's super tolerance or super naivety. Um, I've said before on the immigration issue, I'm balanced. I think we should be compassionate to people who need refuge, but Germany is having a very serious problem with this. I mean, looking back at the Cologne New Year's Eve attacks, it is true that you can't judge all refugees from one, but when you have a mass influx of people, many with very starkly different set of cultural values, it's problematic, and I think this will go down as one of Angela Merkel's biggest legacy flaws. But time will tell. Um, what else is happening in the world? So many things going on. A lot of question marks, of course, over our new Foreign Secretary, Boris Johnson. Um, Rather comical scene when he met John Kerry today. John Kerry said sort of jokingly, "This is called diplomacy, Boris." I think people are underestimating Boris Slow. It is true that he's got this clownish, buffoonish image, but this man's not stupid. He can speak I've heard he can speak five languages. He's published several books. He ran one of the world's great cities. Without bias, I would say the world's greatest city um, for 8 years. He's no lightweight. And I think behind that facade of buffoonery is actually a very serious, arguably devious politician. But I don't underestimate Boris. People are saying, oh, it makes us a laughing stock and so on. On the contrary, I think at this time we need a big character as the face of Britain. Um, and you know what? I'm just going to say it. I quite like Boris. I quite like Boris. Um, I'm not a conservative. I certainly haven't appreciated everything he's come out with, like calling his massive salary from the Daily Telegraph chicken feed was rather, frankly, obnoxious. But what can I say? I like the guy. He's entertaining. He's likable. You can see yourself having a beer with him. What can I say? Um. Anyway, I'm going to get into the main thrust of the video because I've been speaking for long enough about all these external issues, and I'm sure there's many other issues I could add to that. I want to talk about opinions, how we shape opinions, and the circumstances that lead us to those opinions. Now I'll try to restrict the length on this because I do have a habit sometimes of talking a bit too long. But this is going to be a bit of a philosophical video, and I'm going to try and make this video from as open-minded as possible. And for the 10 minutes or so that I am talking, I'm going to try and step outside the box here, like really step outside the box. You know, most of my videos are opinionated, and I don't hide that. You know, that's what they are. But sometimes, you know, I look at people and they come out with opinions. It could be online or it could be a campaign speech or on the news or whatever. And I feel natural hostility. And before you judge that, let me explain. It's not hostility from like, it's not from hatred, but it's a sort of like, I can't tolerate whatever it is they're saying. I'm someone who is quite opinionated, and there's no escaping that fact. So if I hear something, I think you know it's an opinion that I strongly disagree with. There's a natural sort of like, yeah, they're full of shit, and that's a bullshit statement, and it's an obnoxious statement, and I cringe when I hear it. And I'm going to try and avoid getting into personal examples because that would only, you know, mislead people from the point I'm trying to make in this video. Because if I give personal examples, then people will assume that I'm coming from a biased point of view. In this particular video, I'm trying to do the exact opposite. So I'm going to avoid any personal examples. But let's just say I'll hear certain opinions I strongly disagree with. I immediately cringe. Okay, that for right or wrong, that's the way it goes. And I think a lot of people feel that way because words have weight. They have weight. Why? Because words, especially in a political context or a social political context, are directly related to actions and legislation and and consequence on society. So, you know, as we evolved over millennia from, you know, Homo neanderthalis or Homo naledi to Neanderthals to Homo sapiens to modern man, as we have evolved over the millennia, speech has developed. And this is very interesting science behind this. I'm not going to get into the full details, but over time, across the world, language developed for a reason. Of course, it was very primitive at first, like who's going to go out and get the wildebeest, or you know, um, you're in my cave, get out. So it would have been primitive grunts. It gradually developed into something a lot more comprehensive and complex. So today, what do we have? We have a very, very sophisticated world. We have urban societies, we have digital communication, we have organized, sophisticated societies. But we also have war, riots, unrest, and huge amounts of human conflict. And by human conflict, I'm not just talking about armed conflicts like Syria or Iraq or the war against Boko Haram in Nigeria. I'm not just talking about armed conflicts, I'm talking about tension, human tensions. Even in the UK, which is a very peaceful country politically overall, we have real tensions going on here with, you know, the possibility of Scottish independence and, you know, in America, there's deep tensions because of the police Black Lives Matter issue. In France, there's tensions because of the labour disputes. There's tensions all over the world, including countries that are technically peaceful, not at war. In fact, I'd be hard pushed right now to think of a single country in the world that is, I'm sure there's a few, but it seems most countries have some sort of unrest on some level. It does feel like we are living in a particularly turbulent time. And I suppose you could say that for any year in some way or another. But 2016 does seem to be a particularly turbulent period. It could be because some of the world's most powerful countries are facing real questions. The United States has this all these issues going on with the police and Black Lives Matter and so on. And the last video before this, I'll be talking about some of those issues. China, the world's second most powerful country, arguably, is having these, you know, naval disputes which is really heating up. So there's real tension around the world. And I think it is part of human nature that people, whether they admit it or not, on some level we all become tribalized. On some level. I think there is people who never think about politics, and to be quite honest, sometimes I envy those people. Because I'm a very politically minded person. I follow what's going on in the world. And I don't regret it. I like to keep informed, and I feel it's important. But sometimes, just sometimes, I envy people who are apathetic and don't care because they can escape from it. I'm someone. So this is my by choice. No one's forcing me to do it. It's from interest. But the point is, if you are a politically minded person in any sense, so you could be a politician, a political activist, or you could just have an interest. It's impossible to be absolutely neutral on any given issue. And actually, I'm talking about political interests. Actually, people who are apathetic can even find themselves brought into this because nationalism as a concept drags in people who wouldn't usually be politically minded. I know have friends, and I'm not going to go into the details here because it would detract from the point, but they they would not be politically minded people. They wouldn't know the ins and outs of political systems, how they work, and so on. I'm not saying that to be, patronizing. They know much more about other subjects than I would, but they're not politically minded people. Yet when it comes to the issue of nationalism, so the perception that their country is under threat, or the kind of boast that their country is getting more powerful, they can get extremely nationalistic. So I find that nationalism actually drags people into a political sphere of mind. Now, what I really want to touch on is the fact that nobody is really entirely right or entirely wrong. I think what really matters is how people go about their opinions. And it's all very well saying, especially in countries where we value freedom of expression, like, oh, everyone has an opinion, and that's just it. That would be all very well, but the problem is when opinions get so consequential, tempers rise and civility goes out the window. Now, for me, this has always been a bit of a challenging issue because, on one hand, I have respect for the argument that there needs to be more civility because that is a very noble argument. It's a noble argument insofar as we need civility in order to have stability. And because everyone has their opinions and we need to respect other people's opinions. So I do respect the argument and I understand where it comes from. However, I don't entirely agree that it should always be a case of calmly airing out differences. Sometimes I think that expressing anger is a very natural thing. But the underlying thing here is how do you do it? Now, if you express your opinions by yelling in someone's face physically, by sending out threats, and it doesn't matter if the threats are to a powerful person or a Jill or Joe average on the street, a threat is a threat. I think a lot of this depends on how you put forth your opinions. A lot of the, let's say, trolls online who come out with their extremely loaded political or nationalistic views, and I'm talking about people who kind of gang up on others and they'll go to the point of hacking into accounts and so on. I've personally experienced such people. Individually, outside that context, they may be completely normal, reasonable people. But certain issues trigger people, and I'm not talking triggering in the left wing sense. I'm talking literally, triggering in a sense of winding people up. I'm not talking about the politically correct sense. I'm talking about actually getting under people's skin. Um, Certain issues will then, it will get them heated up. And I'm as guilty as anyone. There are certain issues I get very angry over. And I'll be honest, I have been on heated exchanges online back and forth on a wide range of issues. Now, if I ever become a public figure, I would not be surprised if the British tabloids dig up some of the comments that I've made over the years. And I'll have to deal with that at the time and say, yeah, I believe that for X, Y, and Z reason. Um, I can honestly say I've never ever threatened anyone. Never. I have sometimes said things that are less than diplomatic, and I did occasionally go back and apologize because I realized that I'd kind of crossed the line. And the same has happened with me. Others have apologized to me. Um, but I don't necessarily regret sometimes coming out with strong views. I think it's a little bit disingenuous for people to say, "Oh, we should just respect everyone's opinion and, let's all sit down with a cup of tea and talk it out." That's all very well, but when you're talking about issues that sometimes are life and death, now you get issues that are so consequential, it's very difficult for people not to be angry. And I think it's ridiculous saying don't be angry. If people are going to be angry, they're going to be angry. But I do think that responsible adults have a responsibility to contain their anger or at least control it. So express it in words, but don't threaten people. Don't yell in people's faces. Anyway, I want to come to the point about how we're influenced. Actually, it was the former British Prime Minister Tony Blair, not that he needs any introduction, he made this point that people are not born with opinions. They're all. He was really tying into the point about people being influenced. I remember, I think it was a speech or something he gave, but he was spot on with this. Blair was wrong about many things, but he was absolutely right about this. People are molded by their environment. And I think it would be ridiculous to argue otherwise. That's not to say that there aren't people who are exceptional. And, you get, for example, serial killers who have perfectly good upbringings, but there might be some sort of psychological deficit or whatever it is. I'm not going to get into the details with that one because I'm not a psychologist. But generally speaking, though, I think it is fair to say that for whatever reason, people are influenced by their surroundings. Now, this is not to condone particular actions or particular opinions, not for a second. I think that would be the wrong line to go down. But I think it's naive to think that anyone wakes up one day and decides, I'm going to be a jihadist terrorist, or I'm going to be a spray shooter, or I'm going to hate women, or I'm going to hate men, or I'm going to hate gay people, or I'm going to hate black people, or I'm going to hate white people, etc. For whatever reason, people have been shaped to think a certain way. And quite often it could be because of a particular society they're from. So, for example, a country like Pakistan, a lot of people have very conservative views because it is a deeply religious country. So, if you're part of that society, it's quite hard to escape that. Very often, especially in strict Muslim families, young Muslims have a real identity crisis because they find themselves torn between more liberal Western values and more conservative Islamic values. That's just an example, and there's many other examples. Uh, but this can even be found within countries and within democracies. I mean, you may find, for example, that in Britain, I'll give an example. Many people in my part of the country vote for the Labour Party simply because their parents did. And I'm not saying they're stupid or anything like that, but there is unquestionably that culture within, especially in regards to the Labour Party, less so with the Conservative Party, I would say. But there is that Labour culture where people vote for the Labour Party almost without thinking because their parents done it and their grandparents done it. And I think nationalism is one of the most prominent examples of being influenced by environment because almost everybody, and I think I mentioned this in my video about nationalism, is, whether they admit it or not, on some level defensive about his or her country. Most people inherently, even if they criticize their own government all the time, and even if they know full well that there's many problems within their country, most people have an almost instinctive reaction to hearing their country criticized to defend it. I'm not saying everyone does, but it's quite widespread. And people can say, "Well, I know my country has these problems and those problems," but nevertheless, if they hear their country being outright vilified, it's almost like you may disagree and hate a member of your family, But if an outsider attacks them, you would still feel defensive. It's almost like that logic. So I think this is a very interesting subject. People are unquestionably shaped by their upbringing and their environment. Now, I don't want anyone to misunderstand me. That shouldn't serve as an excuse. For example, if someone commits a heinous crime, it shouldn't be a case of, oh, well, their father was a drunk, so that will let them off the hook. Or, that's just an example. Or, I don't know, um, her mother hated men, so that condones her hating men. Whatever it is, whatever the example is, um, I believe adults in a society which has access to information, whether it be a free internet or a free press, public libraries, and so on, I think free thinking adults have a responsibility to think for themselves as best as they can. But even in free thinking societies, there's going to be a certain level of influence that no one can deny. Britain is a democracy. We value free speech. We have multi-party system, etc. And yet, an enormous amount of people, I should say a large amount of people, are unquestionably influenced by the direction the red top press take them. And if that sounds like a snobby statement, maybe on some level, people are also influenced by the broadsheets. There will be Guardian readers who won't admit it, but they will be influenced by the tract of the Guardian. There will be BBC viewers who are really loyal to the news approach of the BBC who would say that they're neutral, but on some level they're influenced. And I'll say it. I am influenced whether I accept it or not. So that's why I resent or I reject this idea when some people say, oh, I never watch the news, I never read newspapers. I'm free, I'm not influenced. And I want to find out for myself. Well, that's all very well, but how can you find out about the world unless you have some sort of source of information? And every source of information comes from some sort of experience or bias. So if you say, oh, I'm completely neutral because I don't watch the mainstream media, with all due respect, you're kidding yourself. Because the so called independent media, whether it be InfoWars or whatever it is, they all have an agenda as well. It may be very different from the mainstream agenda, but the point is because everyone has opinions, it's absolutely impossible as human beings to be 100% neutral on most issues. It is true that there are some issues we don't care that much about. I mean, I'll give an example. Someone might say to me, Nathan, who do you support between Warwickshire and Cheshire in cricket? Now, there is an area where I really wouldn't care because I don't follow the sport of cricket and I know nothing about either team. So that would be an area where I'd be totally neutral. But I'm talking about things that are consequential, especially political issues. Even people who are apathetic are in their own way, I wouldn't say biased, but influenced. So even if people think that they're free because they're apathetic, they're still being influenced in some way or another. And this isn't necessarily a bad thing. We have to accept as human beings that we are flawed. We can never know everything. The smartest person in the world doesn't know everything. Anyway, I'm going to round this up. Let me know your thoughts. Specifically about influence, community, and just how we develop our opinions on matters. Final few thoughts. I don't think there's anything wrong with having strong views. And I think it is a little naive to. Civility is a great thing, I'm not against that. But there also has to be an understanding that anger is a natural part of the human thinking. But I also think that free thinking, responsible adults need to have self control. So, yes, express anger, but don't threaten someone. Don't shout in someone's face. Express anger. Do what I do, talk into a YouTube video or whatever it is. But don't go out and go on a shooting rampage. Don't get into a protest and yell in an opponent's face because it's a behavior of it's not respectful behavior for yourself. And in the end of the day, most people would have inherently some sort of guilt if they take that approach. I think that, yeah, anyway, I'm going to round this up. I've spoken at length. Do let me know your thoughts. Thanks for watching.